DJ Scream, heavy in the streets.
We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood. We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood.
Hood rich.
Get it out the mud.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And we're back. It feels good to be back. Been a bit of a hiatus there because we've just kind of been reading headlines for uh, Saints rumors and supposedly insider information about the draft coming up, but no real news of note when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. But when we look at the appetizer side, we have a UFC event coming up, MMA coming up on Saturday. We have a UFC 314 Volkanovski versus Lopes, and that's April 12th, 2025. So this Saturday coming up, and that should be the standard issue time for pay-per-views. 9 Central, 10 Eastern time, and that's at the Casilla Center in Miami, Florida, United States. So this kind of just a general kind of overview kind of this card is that it seems like all the pay-per-views kind of since UFC 300 have just been, I don't know, felt like a little bit watered down. The amount of fight nights they have in between pay-per-views just kind of takes like an entire fight card having names and notoriety. But still, this card, I think it has potential. And also the fact that there's only one title defense on the card, but you could possibly say that the co-main event is a title eliminator, at least for one of the fighters on the card. But let's just go over kind of the preliminary card a little bit, because I'm talking like names of note. But honestly, the preliminary card on this event is probably it's good enough to be a fight night. So just kind of name off some of the fighters on the preliminary card. The early preliminary, not so much, but the prelims, just your standard prelims, has quite almost every single fight. Like I said, would be good as a fight night main card. But you have a featherweight Darren Elkins versus Julian Erosa. And then you have a Jim Miller fighting in his 46th UFC fight, so that's a record. And we got some. Uh, and I also kind of looked at this card. I'm kind of getting back in talking about Jim Miller, a 40-year-old fighter. It kind of feels like the new wave of fighters against kind of the old head, the standing guards. Like who's gonna top out and who's gonna continue their reign as just UFC legends, or who's going to step over them and use them as a stepping stone as their opportunity to either gain the belt or be next in line for one. That's how this card really feels as well. But what I was saying for the preliminary card, we have a lightweight Jim Miller fighting in his 46th UFC fight versus Chase Hooper. And then you have a women's strawweight who is, this is weird. It's kind of surprising that this isn't on the main card or even possibly like the co-main event for this card, because Yan Zanan, she's the number one ranked women's strawweight, and she just fought Zhang Wei Li for the belt in her last fight, which didn't go well for her, but she still held on to that number one ranking. And then she's fighting Verna Jendoroba, and I think she's like number three. She's the number three women's strawweight. So that's like a title. I would say if Yan Zanan wins in impressive fashion, or if just Verna Jendoroba wins, that would probably put her in line for women's strawweight bout. So that's a just definitely intriguing fight to keep an eye on, just in the just for title implications coming from it. And then the main event on the preliminary card, we have a featherweight bout between Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson. So a lot of notable names just on the preliminary card. We are just saying that this could easily be uh, a fight night, a UFC fight night in between the pay-per-view and the numbered card. But I had to very, very could see the prelim here outdoing the main card, even though the main card does have some very intriguing matchups and some legendary names. It's definitely like I said, it looks like almost kind of like a new wave of fighters, and are they gonna unseat these legends? But anyways, let's get into the main card here and maybe try to throw down some picks on these 5 fights that we have on the main card. So can I get a menu? And so the first fight that we have on the main card of UFC 314, Volkanovski, Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. We have a light heavyweight bout between Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes. And these fighters, I almost kind of look, they're kind of similar. I would say Nikita Krylov probably has the better ground game because he has a lot more submissions over his career. And then I would give the striking just a slight edge in striking to Dominic Reyes just because of the high level and the big names that he fought when he was on that winning streak and fought for the belt against John Jones. A lot of people thought he won that fight, and then he's come back and he's had two after kind of a layoff and what a 4-fight losing streak. He's won his last 2 fights by knockout. So I'd probably give the striking edge to Dominic Reyes. But Nikita Krylov is definitely not one to be messed with. I think has a higher rating in the light heavyweight division. Yeah, he's number 8, and I think Dominic Reyes is just number 11 in the standings and light heavyweight. But he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and he's on a 3-fight winning streak himself against fighters Alexander Gustafsson, Volkan Ozdemir, and Ryan Spann. So he's on a little bit of a winning streak himself, as we were just mentioning about Dominic Reyes. But in his 39 matches, he has 30 wins with just 9 losses. In the 30 wins, he has 12 wins by knockout, 16 wins by submission, and 2 by decision. So he's a finisher. He's a finisher. Whether he wins or loses, doesn't let a lot of fights go to decision. And then in the 9 losses, he has one loss by knockout. So it shows even almost having 40 fights, he definitely has a durable and has a good chin on him. And then submission, been submitted 6 times, and then just 2 losses by decision. So like we were mentioning, doesn't like to go to the judges' scorecards. And probably the best out and best way to beat him is submissions. He's been submitted 6 times. He's shown that he can be submitted. He was submitted just in his 4th fight back. His most recent loss against Paul Craig was a triangle choke. That was in the first round. That was like in the first 4 minutes back at a fight night. March 19th, 2022. So it was a while back, but just overall with the 6 total submissions and his submission losses in his victory, he definitely showed that he can be submitted. And see that's why I'm not really looking at Dominic Reyes as like the best matchup to beat him necessarily, because he doesn't have a ton of submission or dominant very many performances where he's like dominated someone on the ground. Like he's mostly just kind of like a kickboxer and looking to pick people apart on the feet, and then if he gets the opportunity to put them away, he does a good job of that. And that's why I say it also maybe is the better striker of the two between Krylov and Dominic Reyes. But in his last 5 fights, he is 3-2 or 2-3. So he's coming off of that 4-fight losing streak that started against John Jones, and then he got knocked out by Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska, and Ryan Spence. So he's on a long streak there of getting knocked out, and then he took a break from November 12th to November 12th, 2022, all the way to uh, June 8th, 20 yeah 2024. So like a year and a half off because I mean all the knockout and head damage and all that. You obviously needed some time for his chin to recover against those. But since then, he's been on a two-fight winning streak. I don't know how you could judge the quality or the level of uh, talent that he's fought, but he still knocked out his last two opponents. Dustin Jacoby KO punch at 2 minutes of the first round, and then Anthony Smith, which everyone knows Anthony Smith is my favorite fighter. I don't. I really wish he would have just retired after his last fight and lost, but he's got another one where he said it's his last fight, and we'll probably get embarrassed. So I don't know if I look at those two knockout victories as that impressive, but hey, that's the streak that he's on, the two fight winning streak that he's on. And in his 18 fights, he has 14 wins and just four losses. In the 14 wins, he has nine nine wins by knockout, two by submission, and three by decision. And then in the four losses, three of them, almost all of them, have come by knockout, and then never been submitted. So that's a plus. That's something that's definitely different from Krylov, who's been submitted 6 times. He has, and he's been able to uh, get a submission twice in just the 18 fights that he has, and then just one loss by decision. So this is a very good fight and very intriguing. I see if Dominic Reyes has like the best chance of victory in this fight, it's probably to get Nikita Krylov kind of on his heels and maybe land something that rocks him a little bit, and then possibly be able to sink in a guillotine or just a submission that he's not prepared for, kind of when he's dazed and out from the punches for a little bit, and then just is able to catch him in some type of submission. Because Nikita Krylov, besides that, it's really tough. Only been knocked out in almost 40 fights. And then Dominic Reyes, he was on that bad stretch of knockouts, but then he kind of took a step down in competition, fighting some lower competition and kind of some washed fighters in Anthony Smith to get a couple knockouts. But in this fight, it feels like Dominic Reyes is kind of stepping back up in the quality, the ranking of competition that he's fighting. I think that's going to lead him kind of back to where he was when he was on that 4-fight losing streak. And I think Nikita Krylov is going to have a good enough ground game that's going to be better, so he'll be able to dictate where this fight goes. And I think he's going to actually end up getting the knockout over Dominic Reyes. We really want to see gotta see it one more time. After someone comes off such a bad knockout losing streak, I just want to see it get tested. Want to see it get tested again and against a top 10 light heavyweight. So in this light heavyweight bout between a Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes, I'm going with Nikita Krylov to win this by knockout, actually, over Dominic Reyes. And like I said, if Dominic Reyes wins this, I don't think it'll be by knockout. I think it'll be some wild scramble where Nikita Krylov gets kind of rocked for a moment, and then Dominic Reyes is able to jump on some type of choke, like a guillotine or a rear naked choke or something like that. But I'm going with Nikita Krylov to get the knockout in this fight. All right. So now we're on to some fights. Each one of these top 4 fights feel like they could be the co-main event, or it could even be the main event. So for a lot of people, this highly anticipated featherweight bout between Brian Mitchell versus Jan Silva, that to some people they just want to either see they're either kind of fans that either hate Bryce Mitchell or they love Bryce Mitchell. So some want to see him get the submission victory over Jan Silva, or some want to see him get knocked stiff again, like he did against Josh Emmett, just like 2 or 3 fights back. But he'd taken a year off after that as well. So it seems to be pretty intelligent for some of these fighters to, if they're either just experienced a really devastating knockout, or if they've experienced multiple knockouts in a row, they probably best to take a bit of a break. And he took a year off uh, between the Josh Emmett knockout and the Kron Gracie victory that he won in his last fight with a slam and elbows. But Bryce Mitchell, this is definitely grappler versus striker, and more just knockout artist in Jan Silva. And Bryce Mitchell in his last 5 fights, which feel like they're kind of stretched out a little bit because he was a lot more active until he got the brutal knockout that knocked him stiff against Josh Emmett. But he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and he's on just like a 1 fight winning streak when he beat Kron Gracie with a KO slam at UFC 310, and that was December 7th, 2024, at the 39-second mark of the third round. And he had fought that devastating knockout that he got from Josh Emmett that seems to have kind of like painted, or kind of like halted or haunted his career. Kind of, it's mask like everything he does, because everyone can just go back to the brutal knockout that he had, and see any type of fighter in their most vulnerable moments waking up after taking some devastating shots. But he took a break between those fights from December 16th, 2023 to the December 7th, 2024, and the most recent fight he had. But it's not necessarily just from that brutal knockout. It's also some opinions and statements and views, I guess, that Bryce Mitchell says that kind of get some people heated, or some people backing him more, or just kind of the way he sounds and talks because he's from Arkansas. But so he's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. In his 19 fights, he's had 17 wins with 2 losses. And in the 17 wins, he has 1 win by knockout, 9 wins by submission, and 7 by decision. And then the 2 losses, he has obviously the most notable win or loss of his career, the one knockout from Josh Emmett, and then the one submission loss, which was Ilia Topuria. So, some of the best fighters in the weight class. He's lost to a champion and then kind of a title contender. I feel as if Josh Emmett looked like he kind of fell off a little bit in his last fight against Murphy. And you always hear that when you get these 40-plus-year-old fighters, or just 35 and up, you hear the statements about how they feel like they're in the best shape of their life. I immediately just want to pick against fighters when I hear that kind of stuff. So I was kind of happy to see Josh Emmett not win that fight. But we're getting off track a little bit. We're talking about last week's fight night. But just going off, but just going off of his record, his fights, his keys to victory, he's definitely a submission artist. And it just kind of feels like if he doesn't get a submission, he's probably going to want to be the one that's either controlling you up against the cage, or has the ground control. And if he doesn't get a submission, he's definitely fine with just going to decision with the 9 submission wins, and then the 7 decision losses. But never lost a fight decision, just a submission or knockout. So kind of looking to win, or if he doesn't win, he'll get stopped, I guess, kind of. But yeah, I would definitely say it's the freedom of speech that gets people going against him, of either in the positive or the negative direction for him to win. And so he's going up against I guess feels kind of like heavily favored, or at least heavily backed, in Jan Silva, who's just shown that he's just a knockout artist since he's gotten to the UFC, and just his mixed martial arts career in general. Trying to see here, he's on a ridiculous winning streak from Yeah, so he's on a 12 fight winning streak, and he's on a 5-0 in the UFC, and so a 5 fight winning streak in the UFC, and the last four in a row have been either TKO or knockout over Weston Wilson, Charles Jourdain, Drew Dober, and Maliksi Bagdashira. Uh, all those just impressive KO knockouts, and he fought feels like very recently, just like a month and a half ago. He fought on February 22nd, 2025, where he uh, got that TKO punches finish over Maliski at the 4:15 mark of the first round. But I would say that this is a kind of a step up in competition for him. He's not ranked or anything, but he's going up against Bryce Mitchell, who is ranked. So Bryce Mitchell is kind of putting his ranking on the line, number 13. And I know feels like just off of social media, definitely feels like everyone wants to see Bryce Mitchell knocked out, and feels like he has no chance at taking even just the slightest of punch but from Jan Silva. But to me, this feels like your kind of like your classic grappler versus striker. And I mean, in the early times of UFC, it seemed like a lot of times the grappler would end up dominating the striker, fighter that's predominantly the striker. And uh, that's kind of how this feels a little bit, just because it's looked like he had kind of a tough weight cut for this card. He weighed in with like 30, had to weigh in a second time with like only like 30 minutes left to weigh in, and was able to weigh in at what 146, yeah 146. So just uh, don't have to weigh in at exactly 105 for non-championship fights, but he had to cut like 2 pounds to make weight. So maybe looking at a tough weight cut for him possibly, and that would be the perfect thing for Bryce Mitchell if he's able to uh, avoid the first onslaught and wave of strikes, and be able to get Jan Silva down and test him and see what his endurance and stamina is like. But let's before we forget to go over it, going over Jan Silva's total fights in his career. He's had 17 fights with 15 wins and 2 losses. In the 15 wins, 12 of them have come by knockout, 2 of them by submission, and one by decision. And then he's shown he's obviously got a good chin. He's obviously got a good submission defense because he's never been knocked out or never been submitted and just never been finished. And then just the 2 losses have come by decision. But like we were saying, I think this is a big step up in competition for him. And I don't know if this will be the first time he gets submitted, but I think his stamina and his endurance and his weight cut is going to get challenged in this fight. So, in this featherweight bout between Bryce Mitchell versus Jan Silva, I'm actually going with Bryce Mitchell to win this. And that doesn't mean necessarily I back any of his freedom of speech or his beliefs or like him for the personality that he is, but just looking at statistics here, and I feel that he's uh, going to be able to avoid and overcome the first kind of wave of Jan Silva, where he's trying to land those heavy shots and those knockout shots. And I think if he can pull and drag Jan Silva into deep waters, he can win this. He can win this either by getting a submission, or he can win it just by grounding and having controlling the whole fight for a good portion on the ground. So in this featherweight bout between Bryce Mitchell versus Jan Silva, I think I'm going with Bryce Mitchell. I think he's going to end up getting some kind of choke in the later rounds, like late in the second round or in the third round. Get some type of choke, either a real a real likely one, just because it seems like any fighter that's ever lost any fights or has at least one fight on their record, losing one fight on their record for by submission. It always seems like it's a rear naked choke or something like that, rear naked choke or guillotine. And he hasn't been submitted yet, but I think Bryce Mitchell is going to be the one to do it. So see some type of choke later in the second round or in the third round, either a guillotine or a rear naked choke. If it's a guillotine, it probably be more likely that that comes in the first round when they're not all sweaty and they're dry. I'm going Bryce Mitchell with the submission there in that fight. All right, now then on to featherweight, the third fight on the card, a featherweight bout between Yari Rodriguez versus Bellator legend, possibly the best fighter and champion, champ in Bellator history. We have Patricio Pitbull, not Patricky, not his brother, but Patricio Pitbull fighting Yari Rodriguez. And this is another where it's kind of like striker versus grappler. We have your striker Yari Rodriguez who takes all the different angles and has different types of striking. You know, changing from southpaw to orthodox and just tries to come at you at all different types of angles in his striking. And then you have just Tricky Pitbull, who's just literally he's a pit bull on the ground with either submissions or just getting fighters, his opponents in bad situations where he just finishes them with devastating ground and pound on the ground. But this is kind of looks like this is kind of set up to where an impressive win by Patricky Pitbull could put him in line for uh, what was it for a featherweight championship bout. Like put him in the running for that, and for Yari Rodriguez, they would put him back on track after he's lost his last two fights. He fought Alexander Volkanovski and was able to almost grind out uh, 3 full rounds before he got TKO punches at the 4:19 mark of the third round, and then got caught in a arm triangle choke in his last fight against Brian Ortega. That was at the 58-second mark of the third round. But he's just 2-3 in his uh, last 5 fights. But he's fought the guys that he's losing to, or like Max Holloway, guys that had the belt at the time, or just about to carry it at featherweight. And so he had won the interim against Josh Emmett, and then he beat Brian Ortega via shoulder injury, but in the rematch was lost by way of submission. But in his 25 fights, he has 19 wins and 5 losses. In the 19 wins, he's has 8 wins by submission, 5 by submission. So I mean, he's got a ground game as well. He can find a submission and stop you in that way as well. He's a more rounded mixed martial artist than some of these previous fighters that we've gone over that are more strictly strikers and knockout artists, or they're submission ground Brazilian jiu-jitsu or wrestlers. But he has 8 knockouts, but he also has 5 wins by submission, or he can go the distance with you with 6 wins uh, by decision, and in the 5 losses, he's been knocked out 3 times. So that seems for any one facing him, that might be the best way to beat him. But I mean, at the same time, he's got a great striking in himself with winning fights of the night and knockout of the years off of Chan Sung Jung's from the Chan Sung Jung fight a couple of years back in I could say a couple of years back, quite a few years back in 2018. But then he's has one submission loss and one decision loss, and then the one no contest, which is some accidental eye pokes on Jeremy Stevens, but then ended up rematching him shortly. little less than almost a year later, beat Jeremy Stevens by decision. But Yari Rodriguez, like we're talking, he's fighting Patricio Pitbull. I always want to say Patricky, his brother, but Patricio Pitbull, who we were talking about kind of old heads deplacing new heads. That fight's not necessarily in the same breath as some of these other fights because Rodriguez he's fought for the belt. He's 32 years old, but you got Patricio Pitbull, who I thought was just 36 years old. He's actually 37 and will be 38 July 7th. But we have him coming over from Bellator, possibly being one of the uh, best fighters pound for pound, or just the best fighter in Bellator history. He's coming in here off of three and 3-2 off of his last 5 fights. Just a one fight winning streak that he's on. His last fight in Bellator Championship Series 1. Jeremy Kennedy, he beat by TKO, knees and punches at the 407 mark of the third round. And that was to return to featherweight, where he defended the Bellator featherweight championship. He had a couple losses before that were at bantamweight. So that means he had to come up and weigh it a little bit. Let's see here. Now he had to go down in weight, so he's actually been better at featherweight at 145 than 135. So he had a little bit of trouble trying to go down to featherweight and fought in some of those. He fought a lower weight class in his last loss at bantamweight, where he fought for the Bellator bantamweight world title fight. So maybe he had a tough weight cut in that fight because he lost to Sergio Pettis decision, and then he basically Chiro Suzuki. I'm guessing that should have been a featherweight fight, but it ended up being a catchweight of 154. So it was almost a light heavyweight fighter that he was fighting, and Suzuki, where he got knocked out. So one loss could have been due to a tough weight cut, and then the other one could be because he's fighting someone much bigger than him, basically fighting. Basically, could have been two fight weight classes heavier than what he has fought at. So he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and he has the one fight winning streak over Kennedy. But he's had a lot of fights other than just those 5. He's had 43 fights in his career with 36 wins, 7 losses. And in the 36 wins, he's had 12 wins by knockout, 12 wins by submission, and 12 wins by decision. So you could definitely say very well rounded in the ways that he can, in any path to victory. As you can see, he can take any path and win it. A true mixed martial artist, as we like to state, with fighters that win fights by knockout, submission, and decision. And then in the 7 losses, even though he's been in so many fights, he's only lost 2 by knockout. And like we said, one was in a catch weight where it blew his opponent was 9 pounds over. So he's basically fighting a lightweight in that fight. And then one loss by submission, so shows how great his Brazilian jiu-jitsu and wrestling is. And then the four majority of the losses, 4 of them have come by decision. And those are just like grinding out world title contender bouts, So very, very impressive. It's hard to pick against a fighter with such a long resume, and feels like Yari Prohaschek is kind of on a bit of a tough run here. With his 2 recent losses, getting knocked out and then getting submitted, I think Patricio Pitbull is kind of matching up against Yari Rodriguez, who fought for featherweight belt not so long ago that if he can get a win over him and he can get an impressive win over him, Patricio Pitbull could be right in line for a featherweight title bout. So in this featherweight bout between Yari Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull, I'm going with Patricio Pitbull to win this. And I don't know, I think Yari Rodriguez may be super hesitant and on putting himself out there to where he could possibly get knocked out by Patricio Pitbull. But at the same time, I think he's going to be very leery. And after getting submitted at the 58-second mark of the third round in his rematch against Brian Ortega, I imagine that he's uh, trained a lot of ground, grappling, and submission game leading up to this fight. But I still just see Patricio Pitbull just having such a more dominant ground game and being stronger on the ground. And it's just I definitely see him taking Yari Rodriguez down and probably keeping them there for most of the fight. So in the featherweight bout between Yari Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. I'm going with Patricio Pitbull, and I think he's gonna win this by unanimous decision. And that doesn't mean he can't still win it in impressive fashion. If he just completely dominates Jair Rodriguez and doesn't hardly takes any damage and dishes out quite a bit of damage to Jair Rodriguez with his ground and pound and just fluently wins all three rounds with no doubt. I definitely could see Patricio and in line for a featherweight title opportunity. All right, now then, on to the co-main event of UFC 413, Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. We have the co-main event, which is a lightweight bout between another kind of Bellator legend, but he's been in the UFC now. He hasn't had great success in the UFC, but he's had a lot of banger and a lot of memorable fights and some title fights and been waiting around for Conor McGregor. But we have Michael Chandler. I think he's only been 2-4 in his UFC run since he debuted in the UFC. Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett, and I think this is a 5 round, 25-minute co-main event. That's not a title shot, but I think some people will put it out there. At least for Paddy Pimblett, he would get a much better ranking than where he is at number 12 over Michael Chandler, who is number 7. But I think a real impressive win by Paddy Pimblett could put him in line for a lightweight championship bout. So it feels almost kind of like a title shot eliminator fight, especially for the reason that it's a 5 round fight, a 25-minute fight. It just seems odd for that. But once again, this is kind of where definitely where we're talking about the old head kind of legend possibly kind of getting pushed to the side by possibly the new up and comer or the future champion in Paddy Pimblett. But same as that, we're talking a lot more. There's been quite a bit of it talking about like striker versus grappler, and Michael Chandler, even though he has a good ground game, he is a good wrestler. You definitely see that his predominant path and way of his wins over his career are definitely by strikes and knockouts and getting people on their back heels and getting them scrambling and beating people with TKOs with devastating ground and pound. While Paddy Pimblett, on the other hand, is grinding out wins on the ground and beating people with like crazy submission, flying arm bars and triangle chokes and getting people in triangle chokes and then transitioning to the arm bar like he did against Bobby Green. So definitely contrasting styles. But Michael Chandler, he can go on the ground as well. One thing I kind of noticed about these two fighters in kind of the standoff is just Paddy Pimblett I think this happens for Michael Chandler in like a lot of his fights, almost all of his fights. He just looks small. He looks small. He looks like almost two weight classes smaller than Patty Pemblin, and being smaller and I don't know where that hurts you more. Like if you're a striker and you're smaller than your opponent and they're a striker as well, well, you may benefit from maybe being a little more elusive and a little bit quicker. But but if a but if you're smaller and they're bigger and your predominant game is grappling, I think the guy that's bigger almost always wins in that situation because they're just the weight and the strength that they have, the power that they have is just kind of a trump over anything else you do. But Michael Chandler, we kind of already mentioned that he hasn't had that impressive of a reign in the UFC really. Just in his last five fights, he's 1-4 with the four losses, and then if you go back, just giving him a little bit of credit, you go back to his sixth fight back, he beat Dan Hooker as his debut in the UFC. So I think we said that already. He's 2-4 in the UFC, but and he's just fought some killers during his time since he debuted. Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Charles Oliveira again, which that was actually an entertaining fight. The rematch between Charles Oliveira and that was his last fight. That was at UFC 309, November 16th, 2024, and that was a 5 round fight, went all 5 rounds, 25 minutes, and was the fight of the night. That was a fun and memorable fight because it looked like he looked like he had Charles Oliveira in bad situation like early in that fight, and then later in two of the rounds, Charles Oliveira had him like in a uh, had his back and had him in almost like rear naked choke situations, and he was able to like still stand up and get back to his feet and like fly backwards onto his back, trying to slam him like two times. So that he may not be putting together a lot of W's. He's not eating a lot of W's, but he's definitely putting on memorable and performance of the nights and what the fans at least want to see. Want to see someone get knocked out, want to see these bar fight like fights, and you get that from Michael Chandler. But it'll be interesting to see if he takes a different kind of a strategy, approaches this fight uh, differently. I think you kind of see in some of these last couple fights against him, like Dustin Poirier and Charles Oliveira, he comes out like that at first, but after he gets hit real good or he lands a good shot himself, rocking his opponent, he just all that kind of just gets thrown out the window. But Michael Chandler in his 32 fights, he has 23 wins and 9 losses. In the 23 wins, he has 11 wins by knockout, 7 wins by submission, and 5 by decision. So it shows kind of like Patricio Pitbull. He can win anyway, and I mean he has the ground game. He can take you down and get the submission, having 7 submission victories in his career. And then in the 9 losses, he has 4 losses by knockout. That's kind of been predominantly kind of the concern with him. Hasn't really not in those last 4 losses that he has only been knocked out once by Charles Oliveira, but he's definitely seems as if in all those fights, all of his fights in the UFC, he gets rocked at some point. And I think there's one fight where he like actually like blew his knee out almost. So there's definitely moments where he definitely has always kind of looked vulnerable in any of his UFC fights. But knockout just over his career seems like that might be the best way to go about it. Even though Patty Pimblin is probably definitely looking to take this fight to the ground and look for some type of submission. But in the 9 losses, been knocked out 4 times, uh, submitted just once. So it shows that he has submission defense. It doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be taken down and held there and a little pitter patter, lay and pray kind of ground and pound couldn't win the fight for Patty Pimble. But I don't think Patty Pimble wants to go out there and win like that necessarily. And then he has just 4 losses by decision. So he's just very well rounded, whether it's wins or losses or finishes or himself getting finished. but shows that he can defend the submission. Like he's not an easy out when it comes to getting him in any type of submission. And then we talked about Paddy Pimblin, his great ground game, and he is on a bit of a winning streak himself here. Let's see. He's on an 8-fight winning streak, and he's on a 6-fight winning streak in the UFC. He's 6-0 in the UFC, and these are all fights coming by knockout, submission, rear naked choke, submission, rear naked choke. A couple decisions there against Jared Gordon and Tony Ferguson, and then the technical submission against King Green, Bobby Green, where he put him in a triangle choke, and then as he still had him in the triangle choke, he put him in an arm bar and put him to sleep, which was pretty impressive. That was back July 27th, 2024 at UFC 304. But in his 25 fights, he has 22 wins and 3 losses. In those 22 wins, he has 6 wins by knockout, 10 wins by decision. So he's a submission artist. Like he's a submission, a ground tacticianer, fighting kind of the crazy, wild knockout artist. And Chandler, who his basis and his background is like wrestling, like American style wrestling. But then Paddy Pimblin has just 6 wins by decision. And then in his losses, he's never been knocked out and only been submitted once, and then 2 losses by decision. So that's his total 3 losses. So even though this will definitely probably answer some questions for us about Paddy Pimblin, because even though it seems like in a lot of his fights, he when he's striking and on the ground or standing up, he puts his chin out. Like every time he throws punches, he's kind of like putting his chin up and kind of like backing away at the same time while he's got his chin up. I feel like a veteran fighter like Michael Chandler should be able to really test that or take advantage of that. So I think we'll definitely get a really good understanding of how good Paddy Pimblin's chin really is, which he says it's as good as it can be. These fighters from London, England, they really talk up their toughness. But I think we'll finally have the answer to that. If he's still sticking it out like there, and Michael Chandler can land on it a couple times. But in this lightweight bout between Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblin, I'm going with Paddy Pimblin to win this. I think he's going to submit Michael Chandler. Kind of in this whole UFC reign, Michael Chandler, he puts out like exciting fights and seems to come out there kind of with a game plan at first in a lot of these fights, and then kind of as the fight goes along, he kind of just throws that game plan out the window, and next thing you know, he's just throwing haymakers, and before you know it, he gets taken down and he gets caught in something. So I definitely see that's probably how this fight's going to go. And if Paddy Pimblin can just outlast and kind of overcome the first kind of wave of craziness by Michael Chandler will leave himself open to be taken down or to be put in some type of submission. So in this lightweight bout between Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblin, I'm going with Paddy Pimblin to win this. I think he's going to win it by some type of submission. And just because Michael Chandler needs a round or two to kind of before he gets crazy, because he comes into these fights seems like with good game plans, but the first time he gets hit real good or the first time he lands a good shot on his opponent, then it's just all wild. Don't have any idea where the fight's going to go from there. But in recent history in the UFC, his UFC career usually ends up him getting beaten or stopped in some type of way, whether it's knockout or submission. So I'm guessing this will probably be in the second or third round where Paddy Pimblin catches Michael Chandler in some type of submission. All right, now then, on to the main event of this card. We have a featherweight bout between Alexander Volkanovski, the legend, maybe the all-time great featherweight, and Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. And with Alexander Volkanovski, it really doesn't matter what he does at this point in his career. He's pretty much set himself in stone and as a UFC Hall of Famer, but feels like he's wanting to add to his story and to add that even after getting knocked out 2 times in a row, that he can come back and get his title back and go on a little bit of a title reign, defend it a couple times and then kind of go into retirement. Because I'm sure a great an out just any type of great UFC fighter and champion and legend like that, they don't want to go out on a losing record, and definitely don't want to go out on a 2-0 KO'd, knocked flat type of losses by Islam Makhachev or Ilya Tapora, where he just, like, in his entire career, you really never seen Alexander Volkanovski like dominated and beat like that. So, is it size for Islam Makhachev, or because they fought at lightweight champion at lightweight for the belt, where Volkanovski was trying to become champ, or is it just the age? Is his chin gone a little bit and he's slightly washed? And is this not just a stepping stone, but a trampoline into stardom for Diego Lopes, if he's able to beat an all-time great like Alexander Volkanovski, but beat him impressively, and then gain the featherweight title at the same time. But in Alexander Volkanovski's last 5 fights, he's just 2-3, and he is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, with a loss to Islam Makhachev in their first fight back in February 12th, 2023. Was a 5-round fight, which a lot of people thought Alexander Volkanovski won that fight. And kind of where we've talked about for a while how it seems like the whole moniker and you have to beat the champ to be the champ type of thing definitely seems like back then, and maybe even a little prior to that, that's kind of been thrown out the window. To be the champ, you had to be the champ, used to be, and that usually mean that you just had to absolutely dominate them, or you had to stop them at some point in the fight. But that's not really how that first fight against Islam Makhachev went. But then they fought a second time for the rematch, like immediate rematch for a long reigning champion. Well, I guess it was just because, yeah, actually, yeah, I guess Alexander Volkanovski never had the featherweight lightweight championship, so he fought for it multiple times to try to get it. And I guess because that first fight between Islam Makhachev and the title contenders that were available just weren't quite as good after a very good fight between Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski. That was a fight of the night in their first bout back at UFC 284. But then he fought him again on October 21st, 2023, and was knocked out in 306 of the first round, a head kick and punches, and then kind of the same thing, just absolutely just dominated the first and the second round by Ilya Tapora, and got knocked out again. Just a brutal combination, and just the tight boxing and by Ilya Tapora was just so impressive. How dominant he looked over Alexander Volkanovski in that fight. That was the 332 mark of the second round, and that was UFC 298. So we kind of talked about some of these fighters, how Bryce Mitchell took a year off before he fought again after the serious bad knockout that he had. Dominic Reyes, after like getting knocked out 3-4 fights in a row, took a year, like a year and a half off before he fight. Well, even your champ who's always kind of been known for being active and always willing to defend the belt, a fighting champion. I mean, he took a year off, a little more than a year off after these 2 knockouts against Islam Makhachev and Ilya Tapora. So that fight against Ilya Tapora was back on February 17th, 2024. So that was a couple of years ago. So I guess we'll about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. I guess we'll get our answer on if that chin is still good, or if possibly an all-time great, a Hall of Fame, a UFC Hall of Famer, if his chin, if he's washed, or if his chin is gone, and we'll see if that time off has brought it back at all. But so we went over his last five fights. In his total career. He's had 30 fights with 26 wins and 4 losses. In the 26 wins, he has 13 wins by knockout, 3 wins by submission, and 10 wins by decision. And in the 4 losses, he has three losses by knockout, 2 of them pretty recently. Uh, Never been submitted, and then uh, 1 loss by decision. So with predominantly looking to get a knockout, whether it's just a standing striking knockout, or you get your opponent in some type of bad position on the ground where you're able to land a bunch of ground and pound and finish them like that. But also, he's had 10 wins by decision, some couple of those being during his title reign. Those are kind of some fights where he's kind of just controlled the fight, whether it's up holding them up against the cage, or just dominating and controlling the entire fight on the ground. So kind of like a very distinct kind of both worlds. Either he's going to get a knockout, or he's going to try to grind out a win on the ground. And then in his 4 losses, he's been knocked out 3 times, which you mentioned that. And the submissions, he's only had the 3 submission wins, but he's never been submitted on the ground. So that doesn't seem like something that he necessarily goes to a lot, trying to get submissions, but shows that he has a great ground defense, and just as a great wrestler, being able to grind out 10 wins in his career by mostly controlling his opponents on the ground, and then just the 1 decision loss. This fight definitely feels like kind of like a turning of the tide type fight, kind of like what we were just talking about with Michael Chandler uh, versus Paddy Pendlum. Because Michael Chandler, he's 38 years old, will be 39 in April 20th, and then you have Paddy Pendlum, who's just turned 30 a couple months ago, and then you got Alexander Volkanovski, who's 36, fighting Diego Lopes, who just a couple months ago, back at December, turned 30 years old. But with Diego Lopes, you have a great striker in the UFC. Uh, more of a knockout artist, but I mean, he has a great ground game as well. If he was able to somehow get uh, get Alexander Volkanovski in a submission. But over career history, both of these fighters have shown that they have a good submission defense. Uh, Diego Lopes, he's 5-0 in his last 5 fights, and he's 5-1 in his UFC career, with his 1 loss being a decision loss to Movsar Evloev at UFC 288, and that was May 6, 2023. But in his wins to set up this title fight opportunity, he fought Gavin Tucker, submission armbar, Pat Sabatini, KO punches, Sadiq Youssef, TKO, Dan Ige by a tough decision, and Brian Ortega, another tough decision. Those weren't fights that he just absolutely dominated, or didn't get the finish, at least in those fights. And the thing that I kind of highlight is that even throughout all these fights, and some of these fights like the Dan Ige, Brian Ortega, kind of led into his title opportunity. None of those fights have been 5 rounders. He's only fought in a 5-round fight just twice in his career, and that was back at, let's see, Lux 006. Hardly even ever heard of it. And Fury FC 52 back in like 2021. But at least in his UFC career, he hasn't fought in a 3-round fight. So that seems like that would probably be the best way for Alexander Volkanovski, even though he is the older fighter, to win this fight, is try to pull him into the championship rounds, late in the third, in the fourth, and the fifth round, and really see if the young up and comer or the future star or future champion in Diego Lopes, what his stamina, what his gas tank is like. Is it on championship level yet, or will it ever be? But in his 32 matches, Diego Lopes has 26 wins with 6 losses. In those 26 wins, he has 10 wins by knockout, 12 wins by submission, which is wild. That's what kind of leads me. That's kind of what is kind of so intriguing about this fight. Other than you have a UFC, like a clear UFC legend, Hall of Famer, and Alexander Volkanovski coming back from some tough losses, tough knockouts. But these fighters both are so well rounded, and predominantly they like to stand and strike and get knockouts. But both of them are also elite on the ground. So that's a very intriguing part of this fight to see who ends up going for the takedowns first. Tries to shoot in to go for a takedown, or who looks better in the striking stand up early on, and just who feels like their only possible way of winning is to try to take this down to the ground. And then by decision, we have uh, four wins by decision for Diego Lopes to round out his 26 wins. And then in his 6 losses, he has been knocked out twice before, but just like Volkanovski, never been submitted, but also has gotten some submissions. So has a good ground game, has a good submission game, but also has a good defense. So honestly, if I'm being brutally honest with that, I don't see either one of these fighters getting the submission on the ground of one or the other. If it comes any type of way, I imagine it's probably going to be Diego Lopes not testing that chin of Alexander Volkanovski, and maybe pushing it to its limit again and getting the knockout on Alexander Volkanovski. Or if it's Volkanovski winning this, I think he'll probably be able to try to just control most of the fight and grind out a 5-round championship fight. So no losses by Diego by submission, and then the four losses by decision, which I think Alexander Volkanovski wins. That's how I envision it. But in this featherweight, this is the main event of UFC 314. Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. The main event featherweight for the featherweight championship. You have Alexander Volkanovski, the champion. Or actually, this isn't Alexander Volkanovski or Diego Lopes defending this belt. This is actually, I guess it's a interim belt, or not, or it's been vacated because Ilya Tabora is going up to lightweight. So this is just a, a free for all, I guess. So more of your challenger versus challenger for the featherweight strap. So you have Alexander Volkanovski, your challenger for the featherweight strap, versus Diego Lopes, challenger for the UFC featherweight championship bout. And this is a tough one, just in regards to, is Alexander Volkanovski, is he washed? Is his chin gone? That's something that feels like to me is just going to have to be answered before I would put any kind of betting line or picking Alexander Volkanovski. And it just feels like Diego Lopes is on such a hot streak. He's what? Uh, he's 5-1 in the UFC, or he's 6-1 if you count Dana White's Contender Series 37 back up August 31st, 2021. But just in So he's 6-1 in the UFC, but just in like the span of like 2 years, less than 2 years, he's already in contention uh, for uh, for a title opportunity, and that was coming off of a loss to Movsar Evlov, March 6, 2023, UFC 288. But it just feels like he's on a hot streak, riding a hot train, and I'd have to see early on what Alexander Volkanovski's chin looks like, and that would probably be the first 2 rounds. Those are the 2 rounds that he's been knocked out in his last 2 fights. And if Alexander Volkanovski can ride out that storm and overcome the early onset of Diego Lopes, I could see him winning this. I could see him getting a late knockout due to some ground and pound on Diego Lopes, or I could definitely just see him grinding out the fight like you kind of have to do in some of these 5 round fights and just winning by decision. But I think Diego Lopes is going to continue this heart streak that he's on, and I think he's going to get another knockout. You know, to add to his 10, add that 11 knockout over all-time great Alexander Volkanovski, possibly greatest featherweight of all time. So in this featherweight bout between Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, I'm going with Diego Lopes to become the new featherweight champion and the first time featherweight champion. I think he's going to knock Alexander Volkanovski not just out, but maybe out of MMA, out of the UFC with another knockout. That'll be 3 knockouts in a row, losses by Alexander Volkanovski. And like we were stating, uh, because those 2 most recent ones have come like in the first and the second round, I see Diego Lopes, who hasn't recently fought in too many 5 rounds. If he's wanting to get Alexander Volkanovski out of this fight in that fashion, he's probably going to want to do it in the first 2 rounds. So let's just go over this one more time. So we're talking about UFC 314, Volkanovski versus Lopes, and this is April 12th, 2025 at the Casilla Center, Miami, Florida, United States, and that's 10 Eastern, 9 Central time this Saturday coming up, and just run through these picks on the main card picks real quick. So I'm going with light heavyweight in the first fight on the card, light heavyweight between Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes. I'm going with Nikita Krylov to win this fight. And I think he's going to end up getting a uh, knockout over Dominic Reyes. He's going to knock that chin back to where it was a couple fights back, where he was on a 3-4 fight losing streak due to some knockouts. And then on the second fight, we have featherweight bout between Bryce Mitchell versus Jan Silva. And I think Bryce Mitchell is going to win this by submission. I think if he can weather the storm and possibly get out of the first round where Jan Silva's been finishing and knocking out the majority of his opponents, and if Bryce Mitchell is ever to get able to get Jan Silva down, he's going to end up getting him in some type of submission and kind of bringing Jan Silva's whole hype train kind of back down to earth a little bit. So in the featherweight bout between Bryce Mitchell versus Jan Silva, I'm going with Bryce Mitchell. I think he's going to get a submission victory over Jan Silva. And then in the featherweight bout between Yari Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull, the debut of Patricio Pitbull, I'm going with Patricio Pitbull to win this. And Yari Rodriguez, he's had a couple tough losses by submission and by knockout. Talk about a tough fight to try to get back on track. But I think Patricio Pitbull is going to end up having a successful debut in this fight, UFC debut, one of the Bellator all-timers. So in this featherweight bout between Yari Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull, I'm going with Patricio Pitbull to win this by decision. And then the co-main event, you have the lightweight bout between Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblin, and this is kind of your old versus new, and your striker versus grappler. And I'm going with the new. And I think Michael Chandler will have a good game plan going into this fight, but the first time he gets hit or the first time there's any type of wild scramble by either one of these fighters, it's all going to get thrown out the window, and I think that's going to lead to him ending up getting caught in some type of submission that we've seen this happen to Michael Chandler in the past, and just in his what 1-4 in his last 5 fights. I just don't see that getting any better. But maybe it is Paddy Pimblin really stepping up in competition here, and Michael Chandler trying to show that if he is a gatekeeper or a stepping stone, he's a tougher one than one that Paddy Pimblin can easily get through. But in this lightweight bout between Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblin, I'm going with Paddy Pimblin, and I think he's going to catch Michael Chandler in some type of wild submission, or Michael Chandler is going to end up giving up some type of takedown in some terrible moment of the fight and end up losing by submission. All right, and now the main event, the featherweight championship bout between Alexander Volkanovski, the challenger, versus Diego Lopes, the challenger. So this is for the vacant featherweight championship bout, and we're just kind of wanting to see if that chin is still there for Volkanovski. You know, he's a great Hall of Famer, all timer. You know, you could put him up on your Mount Rushmore, but I just kind of need to see, is he washed or not, or has that chin turned to glass, or has it turned to sawdust or just dust? And coming up against a crazy knockout artist, and not just a knockout artist, just a finisher, and Diego Lopes, who's in like the last year and a half or so, he's on quite a run and kind of a runaway train and a hot streak, and I think he's going to keep it going. I think Alexander Volkanovski, I'm leaning more towards the washed side than anything. And we hear this stuff. I was just talking about how Josh Emmett, you know, almost 40 years old, talking about how he's in the best shape of his life. You were kind of hearing similar kind of, and then he goes on to lose. But then you're kind of hearing kind of the same stuff from Alexander Volkanovski, saying that he didn't have any cheat meals during this camp. He didn't drink any alcohol during this camp, and he feels the best that he ever has. You know, you always hear that from guys that are pushing 40 years old or look like they're about washed, and then they end up just going on and having unimpressive performances, or they even get beat or knocked out or finished. So in the featherweight bout between Alexander Volkanovski, the challenger, versus Diego Lopes, uh, the challenger for the UFC featherweight championship bout, I'm going with Diego Lopes to win this. And I think he's going to win within the first 2 rounds, just in recent history. He's going to get a knockout over Alexander Volkanovski, an all-time great, regardless of how this fight goes. But anyways, that's UFC 314, Volkanovski versus Lopes. I'm excited for it. You know, it's a little bit of a downer, not quite as exciting because you don't have multiple championship bouts on the card. I guess the co-main event is kind of like a possible title eliminator because I think it's a 5 round fight. But you know, the card just feels a little lacking because of that. And there's no heavyweight fighters on the card. If you know me, they can put the uh, heavyweight fight on the curtain jerker of the early prelims, and that to me heightens the quality of the card just alone. Whether they have like some notable names on uh, the main event of the preliminary card, or just on the main card, if we'll definitely on the main card, especially if we'll ever get a heavyweight title bout ever again. But anyways, I think that's about all I have for you. So can I get a check, please?